meaningfully to a government where there is universal suffrage, but the overwhelming majority of people choose not to participate. We will have created a new form of government never known on the history of the planet. And we'll have to come up with a new word to describe it. The other thing that makes me feel a little down sometimes is how hard it is to get good people to run for office. It's increasingly hard. I talked to my Republican friends about this. We're in a year where every legislator is going to be up in November. And I talked to them about this issue of, boy, I got to admit, I'd like to beat some of your guys, but it's kind of hard to get good people to run. And they say, you don't need to feel too bad because we're seeing the same thing on our side. Many, many law firms have explicit policies that their lawyers are not able to run for office because they might want to do some business with the city or the state or work on a bond issuance that the state does, and so many law firms have that now as an explicit policy. I just am fortunate that the firm that I worked at had never had anybody run for office before, didn't know how hard it would be, and so they didn't have a rule covering the situation when I went to them in 1994 and asked them to do it. A huge number of the folks who graduate across the street at the Darden School will go to work with financial institutions that because they do bond financing for governmental units make it off limits for any of their employees to run for public office. So much of our talent pool in this Commonwealth, in this country, work now for institutions where there is an explicit written policy that you are not able to run for office. Now, some of that is because of ethical rules that have some validity, and, we've got to be careful about those. But I am starting to feel very, very nervous about, the best and the brightest, you guys. If you guys aren't out there in 5 or 10 or 15 years trying to run for office, well, we're still going to have office holders. It just won't be people that have your wonderful skills and training. And there are a whole series of reasons why people don't run for office: the publicity and the financial sacrifice and the time away from families. And if you make a mistake, you'd make one in full glare. If you make a mistake in your private life, you make it surrounded by people who know you, know your good side. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt if you're entitled to the benefit of the doubt. But in public life, you make a mistake and you make it in the glare of a lot of people who they don't like politicians anyway. They're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. They want to assume the worst about you right away. There's a lot of reasons why people don't run for office. If you put pluses and minuses on a T chart, if you're trying to make the decision, the minuses will always be more significant. But I will say to you, having been in public office now for 13 years, it has been the most marvelous experience. Even with the various headaches, it's marvelous. I can drive by schools in Richmond that wouldn't have been built had I not been a city councilman and mayor. And I know that politicians, and especially ex-politicians, have a short shelf life, and my political career will come to an end, and 2 or 3 years later, people will look at me and say, "Didn't you used to do the weather or something?" But when that day comes, I will still be able to be in my car and drive by a school that I got built, and if nobody else remembers it, I'll remember it. And I'll have that feeling every day for the rest of my life, being able to see things in my community that my thumbprint are on because I got into public life. And that is an enormously satisfying feeling. And so despite all the negatives and despite all the challenges, I would say to you, you are very well suited. Law training, people joke about too many lawyers in politics, but I tell you, legal training is a wonderful thing for being in public office. Some of it is because of the obvious. You're reading text, you're reading laws, you're reading cases, and that's what legislators do. So you're trained to do the things that public office demands. But I think the real reason that lawyers are good in public office is because of temperament, is that you get used to, if you represent clients, I did in public life. I had to be a zealous advocate for my client, and the guy on the other side was being a zealous advocate for his or her client. And we would fight very hard in the courtroom. But if we couldn't step away from our client's dispute and civilly engage with one another and talk about discovery and, hey, can you give me a few extra days for this? Or, hey, let's work on when the trial should be scheduled. If we couldn't civilly work those things out and step away from the dispute our clients had, then we weren't going to be good at our job. And lawyers, whether they're in a negotiating context or in trial law, learn that pretty quickly, that you've got to be able to maintain a civil relationship in order to do the job that you need to do. And what I see in public life is a lot of people who take conflict too personally. Brian, you voted against me yesterday. Man, I'm going to make your life miserable. or Allison, I can't believe that you said what you said about that bill that I put in. I see people who don't have the kind of legal training that we have finding a conflict in views as something that's personally threatening and then letting it erode a relationship that hurts their effectiveness down the road. But lawyers have a way of understanding that and letting the problem of the day go by. And you may have voted against me today, but tomorrow I'm still going to work on trying to get your vote, and we're going to have a good relationship. And so that's my last tip to you of the 5 ways to have a public service career. I hope some of you will think about running for, city council or school board or Commonwealth's attorney or the General Assembly or running for Congress, because we need people with legal training. I believe deeply we need it. We need people with legal training and the kind of skills you bring, and good people with great educational backgrounds of all kinds, legal or others. We need them in public life. I'm going to conclude and say I've given you some tips about how to build a public service career. Focus on the community first. Be realistic about what salary you hope to earn. Recognize that you're not trying to build a career. You're going to have serial careers, and be open to that. Be voices and bridges of reconciliation between people. Think about running for public office. But let me finish and just talk about why to be in public service. And in some ways I don't have to do that, because this is a self-select audience. If you weren't already sold on the mission, you wouldn't have come here on a Saturday when you could have been seeing the Florida State game or doing a lot of other things. You wouldn't have come here to listen to this. But John mentioned that when I was at Harvard Law School, I took a year off and went to work as a missionary in Honduras. And I say for 2 reasons it was the single best decision I've ever made in my life. The first reason is because it really reoriented the way that I thought about my career and what I wanted to do and what I had to contribute. And I'm going to share that with you in a second. But the second reason it was the best is I started off in Harvard a year ahead of my wife, and it was a very large school. And had I not taken a year off and then gotten out of sync and then ended up in her class, I'm not sure we ever would have met. And so I always say that decision, just worked out so wonderfully well. But I took this year off at Harvard because I was a first-year student, and I was surrounded by a lot of very self-assured people who really seemed to know what they wanted to do in life. And they might have been good actors. Maybe they didn't know what they wanted to do in life, but they seemed very self-assured. And I didn't really feel that way. I'd gone through college at the University of Missouri in 3 years, and I had a vague sense of wanting to do public interest work, but I didn't know any lawyers. And I didn't really know what that meant. And so in the middle of my first year, I thought, maybe if I took a year off and I spent some time, I could really kind of get my head straight and figure out what it was that I wanted to do. I had this contact through my high school, a Catholic high school in Kansas City with a mission in Honduras, and I just wrote them and said, can I come down and volunteer for a year? And they said, sure, come on down. So I told the dean and told my parents and told all my friends, I'm leaving, I'm going to go do this. Most of them didn't expect to see me back. They were like, well, you must not like law school, or, they had their own thoughts about why I was doing this. But the year turned to be a very, very powerful year for me. And one thing that happened in that year, and Ann's heard me tell this story way too many times, but it is, if you ask, you could probably all ask yourself the question, what's the best piece of advice anybody's ever given me? This is my story of that. I was in Honduras, and I was running a vocational school, teaching kids to be carpenters and welders. And that was a powerful experience in many, many ways, working with these students. But during the times we would break, there would be a Christmas break or another break, I would often travel up into the mountains with priest friends, Jesuit priests, to go village to village and visit people. And this one friend of mine, Father Patricio, who is still, Ann and I went and visited him on our 20th anniversary 2 years ago. Yeah. Just seems like 25 years. No, that's not good. But Patricio and I, over Christmas of 1981, traveled up into the mountains of Honduras, and we drove the four-wheel drive vehicle as far as it would go, and then we got out of that, and then we got on mules, and we would just go to village, celebrating Christmas Mass in this very, very poor area, very poor country, second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti at the time, and probably still is. We got to these villages, and the trend would be kind of the same, or the pattern. We'd arrive at a village, and they might not have had a priest there for 5 or 6 months, and so we would prepare for one of these mega masses there would be 5 weddings and 10 baptisms and everything all at once, a big community celebration.